Following the events relating to the robberies of the Mudgee and Canberra mail trains in the early 1930s, George Arthur Morris, who turned King's evidence and was therefore not charged for his role in the crimes, apparently went straight. He established Morris Motor Engineering Works in Burrows Road, Alexandria, valued at between £3,000 and £4,000. Morris was a moderate smoker and non-drinker, and was widely respected. Morris had a wife named Ida and 3 sons, the eldest of his boys serving in the military during World War II. The second eldest helped in his father's engineering works. His wife left him in 1937. In reality, he continued the life of crime he had pursued since at least 1927. He was known to have changed over engines and stolen cars at his works. His own car had been given a new engine which had come from a stolen US Army truck. In December 1938, he did repossession work for financial companies. Morris, who stood 5'8", was heavily built, weighing 14 stone, and whose nickname was the Ambling Alp, which no doubt came in handy convincing those who defaulted to relinquish goods. He exuded an air of quiet determination. Morris turned 43 on the 18th of August 1943. On the 11th of December 1943 there was a break and enter on a property owned by James Watt in Chandos Street, Crow's Nest. 5 men got away with a gold chain, 3 gold watches, an iron safe, and £2,500. The safe was taken to a garage at Newton and opened with an oxyacetylene torch. 3 of the gang didn't evade the law for too long, being charged on the 22nd of December. £1,215 of the stolen money was recovered. 500 of the money in £5 notes was placed in a glass jar and hidden beneath stones and grass on a vacant lot in Neild Avenue, Paddington, for 3 days. Those charged were a medical orderly named Cyril Roy Humby, aged 47, a miner named Alfred Arthur Jordan, who was 32, and George Arthur Morris, aged 43, who gave his profession as engineer. Humby had been a thief most of his adult life. In January 1913, when he was called on stage to assist in a magic act at Sydney's Adelphi Theatre, the then 19-year-old performed his own trick, deftly spiriting away a silver candlestick valued at 12 shillings and sixpence. Humby then disappeared inside for 3 months, it being the 3rd time he'd been caught in recent months. He was sentenced to 3 years for shopbreaking in 1929. Alfred Jordan too had a history of crime, convicted of stealing a small amount of gold from a hotel in 1930. It was from his brother Wally, who was dating Watt's daughter, that the group learned of the stash. On the 7th of February 1944, Cyril Humby was sentenced to 3 years jail for his part in the robbery. Morris was due to appear in court on the 20th of April. Harold Scotts, a milkman, was on his round at 5:30 a.m. on the 29th of March 1944 in High Street, Millers Point, not far from Argyle Place, when he happened upon a parked sedan car, facing forward on an incline. He didn't take much notice at first. Then he saw blood on the running board, and some which had flowed into the gutter. He fetched a light and looked in through the open door. The driver was slumped over with his head leaning out the door, his hand still gripping the steering wheel, and his feet on the pedals. George Arthur Morris would never face trial over the Crow's Nest robbery. He had been shot the previous night by at least 2 people, and they clearly meant for him to be dead. There were 6 bullets in his body, and another 6 in his head. Some reports say 15 shots in all were fired into him, the most seen by New South Wales police in a murder to that time. Of 4 in his torso, 1 had gone directly through his heart. 1 bullet had gone through his head and lodged in his right arm. Small pieces of his skull were found up to 15 feet away from the car. The roof of the car was dented by a bullet and spattered with blood. Another bullet entered the right front door. Morris was known to carry large sums of money with him, but when found had only a few shillings in his pockets. Incredibly, most of the residents of the street had heard the shots, but most thought it was boys letting off crackers, which was common. Mrs. Catherine Regan was having a cup of tea with her son in her kitchen at 9:40 p.m. when they heard the shots. She went into the hallway but was afraid to open the front door. Instead, she peered through the curtains in the front window. Although only a couple of minutes had elapsed, and she could see Morris's car, she saw and heard nobody in the street. Leslie Cray returned home some time later and saw Morris's slumped figure and the blood, but he took Morris for a drunk passed out and the blood as liquor that had spilled from a bottle. Police investigating the hit believed that Morris had been killed because he talked too much. Morris was thought to have been involved in, or had knowledge, of every major crime in New South Wales in the 1930s. They speculated he had been shut up because he knew who was behind the Yandera train bombing and was about to talk, perhaps to gain himself a lighter sentence in his upcoming trial. Another theory was that Morris's death involved the Sydney baccarat gambling racket. In the 7 years following, up to a dozen underworld identities in Sydney and Melbourne connected with baccarat were shot dead. One of those, Miles McKeon, was shot dead in his car on the second anniversary of the Morris murder. The most obvious motive for the murder was that Morris had sold out his accomplices in the train robberies, and the Safe Gang felt he would do it again, and hushed him up permanently. Humby, however, was in jail, and Jordan, it was discovered, was arrested later on the night of the murder, pilfering parcels at the Central Railway station after an evening playing two-up. With so many motives and so many people with a grudge, the question was who had done it. It was established that Morris had received a phone call at home and had agreed to meet somebody that night in a darkened section of High Street. He attended the Capitol Theatre that night with friends to see a movie called Good Luck, Mr. Yates. Then he drove off alone in his black Ford sedan at 8:45 p.m. in good time to keep his rendezvous. It seems as soon as he pulled up, his killers opened the door and blasted away at the victim, before running back to their own car and driving off into the night. On one side of High Street there is a sheer 50-foot cliff drop, at the bottom of which is Hickson Road. It was on this street, near the Walsh Bay wharves, on the 11th of June 1935, that Reginald William Holmes was gunned down in his car on the eve of attending a court case. Holmes was due to give evidence in the infamous Shark Arm murder case. His murder was never solved. Due to the proximity of the two cases, it left some wondering if the same killer was involved in both shootings. With the entire Sydney underworld as associates, police set about the exacting task of trying to squeeze information out of them. With nothing forthcoming, the state government offered a £200 reward on the 27th of June 1944 as an incentive for anybody to come forward. With no takers, it was increased to £500 in August. While Morris never faced trial, he did confess to the safe robbery when arrested, and handed over £215, which he said was his share of the robbery. In July, this sum was returned to the owner of the safe. At the inquest held in August, it was revealed that police had spoken to a woman named Jean McNichol Evans, who had been living with Morris for 2 years, at Morris's home the afternoon following the murder. She said that Morris had told her who had phoned him, and why. The other man wanted him to assist in the hold-up of Siddy Kelly, another well-known member of the underworld, who was running a baccarat house for a crooked financier named John Walcott Forbes. A detective had gone to Bondi and interviewed the man they believed had phoned Morris to make the deadly appointment. That man was named as Joseph Harold Ryan. Ryan denied it, or having had anything to do with the murder. He claimed he was working overnight on the wharves from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. Ryan's lawyer preemptively brought up the allegations that he was formerly known as the Grey Shadow and had been arrested for armed robbery, so that he could stress his client had been acquitted of all the allegations against him. Jean Evans had further stated that about 2 years earlier, a man named Jack the Flea Markham had informed her that Ryan had plans to shoot Morris then. Ryan denied he was on bad terms with Morris, and had visited him at his home 3 weeks before he was murdered. When it was put to him that he knew Morris had told police that Ryan had gone to Melbourne in 1943 to obtain the special type of paper on which ration coupons for petrol were printed, he denied it. When told that he had been under constant police surveillance while in Melbourne, Ryan said he didn't know that. He'd only gone to work on the wharves in Melbourne for a change of scenery. Asked if he was aware that a quantity of ration coupon paper had been stolen while he was in Melbourne, Ryan said he did not know that. In reply to the police sergeant assisting the coroner asking Ryan, who had asked the man to repeat himself several times if he could hear him, Ryan coolly replied, "You are rather bombastic." The impeccably dressed Ryan claimed Siddy Kelly was a police informer and had sooled Mrs. Evans onto him. He had been told this by people who attended the baccarat games, but he refused to name them. Pressed, he said Teddy Kelly, who was a doorman at the games, was one, and Mo Reynolds, who said City had bought police protection. Ryan said Morris had given evidence against him in 1935, but pointed out the judge said he wouldn't hang a dog on it. Asked if he regarded a man who had lied about him as his enemy, Ryan said no. George Mullins, a Member of Parliament and Secretary of the Sydney branch of the Waterside Workers' Union, said he had known Ryan for 19 years, and he had never had trouble with absences from work. 3 other wharf labourers vouched for Ryan's presence at work at the time of the murder. Nevertheless, Ryan was committed for trial on the 8th of November 1944 for the murder of George Morris. Was Ryan's lucky streak about to desert him now? Certainly not. The charges were dropped on the 23rd of November. The prospects of conviction on such slim evidence were non-existent. Joseph Harold Ryan had been involved in some of the biggest robberies of his era, but had managed to avoid legal repercussions. If it is true he was planning to rob Sidney Kelly, even the Baccarat King of Sydney wasn't too big a target for him. A crime reporter, Greg Brown, went on record as saying that Ryan was the preeminent hard man of Sydney in the 40s, even more feared than infamous killers like John Frederick Chow Hayes and Joey Hollowbone. It was said if someone learned that the quiet, well-dressed Joe Ryan was looking for them, they would flee the city and go bush rather than face him. Ryan's ability to keep secrets cloaks what made him so dreaded. There is no public record of him assaulting or killing anyone, no convictions, but there is the lingering suspicion that he murdered Morris, and because of the similarity, maybe he killed Holmes as well. There could have been others. There were certainly many underworld killings never pinned on the perpetrator. Of his associates, Lancelot Lynch died on the 20th of January 1946, aged 46. Percy Jacobs is thought to have died in Victoria in 1956, and Roy Wilkinson and James Caffrey both breathed their last in 1969. After the charges were dropped, Ryan disappeared from the headlines and was forgotten. He always was something of an enigma, and remains so. The secrecy that enshrouded his escapades has ensured that aside from a few spectacular bouts of criminal bravado, the full story of Joseph Harold Ryan's life and times will exist forever mostly in the dark corners of history.